Real people, real confessions, the stories you weren't supposed to hear. Welcome to Beyond Reddit Stories. They say your wedding day should be the happiest day of your life. Flowers, pot, music, promises whispered in front of everyone you love. But if I'm being honest, I think my wedding was the day I realized just how alone I really was. I wish someone had warned me that sometimes the people who smile at you the most might secretly be hoping you'll fail. If I'd known what was really going on behind those polite congratulations and tight hugs, I don't know if I would have walked down that aisle at all. Even now, when I look back at the photos, every smile feels like a lie. Because hiding just a few feet away from me that day was a woman I never expected to see again. A woman my husband once loved. A woman who was invited behind my back to my wedding by the very people who were supposed to become my family. And the worst part, I didn't find out until it was already too late. Until my vows were said. Until the damage was done. This is the story of how my in-laws tried to sabotage my marriage before it even began, and how I nearly walked away from everything I thought I wanted. Before all that chaos, I used to think my life was pretty normal. I wasn't someone who grew up dreaming of a fairy tale wedding or some dramatic love story. I just wanted something real, something safe. I met Daniel at work. We were both analysts at a mid-sized tech firm. Both overworked and slightly burnt out, and both convinced we didn't have time for a relationship. It started with coffee breaks, random lunches, and walking each other to the parking lot after long shifts. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was kind, consistent, and made me feel calm. In a world where everyone seemed to be playing games, he didn't. I remember the first time I met his family, though they were polite but in an oddly distant way. His mother especially. She had this habit of looking me up and down like she was still trying to figure out what category I fit into. I told myself it was just nerves that maybe she'd warm up once she got to know me. Daniel always said, "She's just traditional. Don't take it personally." So I did what most people do when they want to be liked. I tried. I asked her about her recipes, helped clear the table after dinner, sent her flowers on her birthday. But nothing really changed. The only time I ever saw her light up was when she would accidentally bring up Daniel's ex-girlfriend, Alicia. She'd say things like, "Alicia used to help me with the garden," or "Alicia always knew what Daniel liked." She never said it cruelly, but it always felt like a reminder, "You're not her. You'll never be her." Daniel would roll his eyes afterward and apologize, but a small part of me always wondered if some piece of his family still lived in the past. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself every mother-in-law is difficult. I kept focusing on the good parts. Daniel and I moved in together. We adopted a dog. We got engaged at a little Italian place where we had our first date. When he proposed, I cried not because it was a grand gesture, but because it felt safe, truthful. I thought marriage would be the next chapter in a fairly steady, ordinary life. I thought I was marrying a man with a family that would grow to love me in time. I didn't know then that they still weren't ready to let go of the woman they wished he'd marry instead. The moment we started planning the wedding, things began to shift. At first, it was subtle little comments here and there. His mom insisting on having a say in every small detail: the venue, the invitations, the flower arrangements. At first, I welcomed the help. I thought it could be a bonding experience. But it quickly became clear that help wasn't the right word. She wasn't helping. She was taking over. Whenever I suggested something like a modern outdoor ceremony or simple white roses, she'd give me that tight smile and say, "Well, that's not really our family's style, our family," as if I was a guest at my own wedding. Then she started excluding me from the planning altogether. I would find out decisions were already made before I'd even been told there was a conversation. I remember showing up to a cake tasting and being told the flavors had already been chosen. They picked chocolate and raspberry because apparently Daniel's ex used to bake raspberry cakes for him and it was his favorite. I felt humiliated, sitting there, smiling politely while my future mother-in-law talked about another woman like she was still part of the family. One day, I came home to find Daniel staring at his phone, looking frustrated. He told me his mom had sent him a list of suggested guests. That list included people we barely knew, extended relatives I'd never met, old family friends, and at the bottom, Alicia, his ex. Why would she even suggest that? I asked him. He looked exhausted. "It's insane. I'll tell her no." And he did. He texted her right there in front of me. She didn't argue, but she didn't apologize either. She just said, "It's just a suggestion. Alicia was a big part of our lives for years." Our lives, not his R. I wish that was the worst of it, but it kept going. She started dropping by our apartment unannounced. She'd bring old photo albums and open them right in front of me. Pictures of Daniel in college, Daniel at Christmas, Daniel with Alicia, smiling under holiday lights. She'd say things like, "They were so good together, you know. I always thought they'd end up married." I remember feeling my face burn. I tried to be polite, but I could feel something breaking inside me. I started to hate going over to their house. I would literally feel sick before family dinners. The final straw before the wedding day was the guest list meeting. His mom accidentally printed an older version of the guest list where Alicia's name was still included. When I pointed it out, she replied, "Oh, I must have printed the wrong one, but I still have her updated address if we need it." If we need it? Daniel tried to calm me down that night, telling me she wouldn't actually invite her. He promised me she wouldn't dare. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I wanted to think his family wouldn't disrespect me like that. But somewhere deep down, I knew they were capable of it. I just didn't want to admit it. By the time the wedding weekend came, I was exhausted not from excitement, but from feeling like I was fighting for a place in my own life. I kept telling myself just one more day, just get through the ceremony, and maybe things will finally settle. I had no idea the worst was still coming. The morning of the wedding started out deceptively calm. I got ready with my bridesmaids, tried to stay positive, and told myself, "It's finally here. Just breathe." The makeup artist kept asking if I was excited. I smiled, nodded, I lied. We arrived at the venue, a beautiful converted barn Daniel and I had chosen together. People were already arriving. I saw familiar faces, childhood friends, relatives flying in from different cities. For a few golden moments, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had worried for nothing. Then I saw her. She stood near the bar, in a soft blush dress, holding a champagne flute like she belonged there, Alicia, smiling, laughing, with my mother-in-law brushing something off her shoulder like they were family. Every muscle in my body froze. It felt like the air was sucked out of the room. I could hear people talking, music playing, glasses clinking, but my ears were ringing. I remember gripping the side of a table to steady myself. At first, I thought maybe she just crashed it on her own. But then I saw the way my in-laws greeted her warmly, knowingly, and I knew she had been invited by them. I walked straight to Daniel. He looked confused when he saw my face. "She's here," I said. "Who?" he asked. "Alicia." His eyes widened like he'd seen a ghost. Then he looked around the room and saw her. I watched him go pale. He whispered, "I swear to God, I didn't know she was coming." I believed him, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. The ceremony started late because I locked myself in a dressing room for 15 minutes, trying not to cry off my makeup. My maid of honor pleaded with me through the door, telling me it was going to be okay, but I felt sick, betrayed, humiliated. This was supposed to be my day, and there she was, one aisle behind my own mother. I walked down the aisle in a fog. I could barely look at Daniel. I tried to keep it together during the vows, but every time someone clapped or smiled, I imagined them sneaking glances at her, whispering, "Wasn't that Daniel's ex?" I could feel my mother-in-law's smug satisfaction from across the room like a physical presence. After the ceremony, during the photos, Alicia actually came up to offer congratulations. "You look beautiful," she said, with that polite smile, like she was the gracious guest of honor. I didn't respond. I turned to my mother-in-law and asked, quietly but directly, "Did you invite her?" She hesitated. Then she said, "Well, she was a part of Daniel's life for a long time. It didn't feel right to exclude her." Exclude her from my wedding? I don't remember exactly what I said back, but I know my voice shook. I know Daniel tried to jump in. I know my father-in-law stepped closer, telling me not to cause a scene. That's when something in me snapped. I took off my veil, right there, pulled the pins out of my hair, and handed them to my maid of honor. I walked out of the barn, across the gravel in my wedding dress, my heels wobbling. I found an empty parking area behind the venue, sat down on the pavement, and just cried. No one followed me for a while. When Daniel finally came out, he sat next to me in his tux, both of us looking like a ruined fairy tale. He kept saying he was sorry. I kept saying nothing. The party went on inside, without us. People danced, speeches were made, drinks were poured, and I was outside, in my wedding gown, mourning something I couldn't name. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just angry, I was grieving. Grieving the illusion that these people would ever truly accept me. Grieving the trust I thought I had in them. Grieving the idea that this day was mine. Daniel asked me if I wanted to leave. I said yes, and together, quietly, without another word to anyone, we got into his car and drove away, leaving our own wedding behind. Leaving my own wedding felt like the most humiliating thing I had ever done. But strangely, it was also the beginning of something honest, maybe, for the first time in my relationship. Daniel and I drove in silence that night, but it wasn't the angry kind of silence. It was the kind where everything unnecessary had fallen away. We checked into a small hotel, ordered cheap takeout, and talked more candidly than we ever had before. We talked about boundaries, about how love isn't just about two people, it's about who and what they allow into their shared life. He apologized not just for that day, but for every time he let his family disrespect me under the excuse of tradition. He said he finally saw it clearly, and for the first time, I let myself say aloud that I deserved better. A few weeks later, we made a decision together we would move to another city, somewhere far enough that visits had to be intentional, not convenient. We told his parents we needed distance. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It didn't have to be. It was a quiet refusal to keep participating in a dynamic that made me feel small. That decision changed everything. It didn't fix all the damage instantly, but it gave us room to start fresh. Daniel and I slowly rebuilt our marriage not as an extension of his family's expectations, but as a partnership with its own walls and doors. We learned how to protect each other, not just love each other. I used to think strength meant being accepted. Now I know strength sometimes means walking away from the people who refuse to see your worth. And sometimes, it means walking away in a wedding dress. If someone listening to this is going through something similar, being tolerated, compared, or quietly undermined, please hear me when I say, love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself. You shouldn't have to compete with the past or beg to be respected. And if the people around you can't celebrate who you are, then maybe they aren't your people. I didn't get the wedding I imagined, but I got something else, a clearer sense of who I am, and a husband who finally stood with me, not just beside me, and in a strange way, that's a happier ending than any perfect ceremony could have given me. Thank you for listening to my story truly. I know it wasn't glamorous or picture perfect, but sometimes the realest stories are the ones that aren't tied up with a bow. And maybe that's why you're here. Maybe something in my experience made you feel less alone in yours. If you've ever felt like you were being compared to someone else, or treated like you were never enough, I hope my story reminds you that you have the right to draw a line. You are worthy of respect, of being chosen fully, not by default, and love that costs you your dignity. That's not love, it's obligation dressed up as tradition. I'd really love to hear what you think. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have walked away from that wedding too, or tried to stay for the sake of appearances? Drop a comment below and let me know. Your stories and opinions matter more than you think, and someone else reading them might gather the courage they need too. If this kind of real-life story resonates with you, stories about betrayal, hard choices, unexpected strength, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more honest, raw stories coming, and you won't want to miss them. And if you've ever had a wedding disaster, a toxic in-law situation, or a moment where you finally said enough, feel free to share it in the comments. This isn't just my story, this channel is a space for all of us. Thank you again for staying with me until the end. I hope you leave this video not just entertained, but a little braver than before.